This is the ESPN Aussie Hoops Hour podcast. Kane and Olgun back 24 hours later than usual. And Olgun, I am to blame for that. I was traveling back to the East Coast from San Francisco. And we are going to get to what happened with Adelaide and South East Melbourne. We might talk a little bit of Kyrie Irving. We might talk a little bit of Dash Daniels as well. So there's still plenty to get to. Of course, maybe a quick look ahead to the semi-final series we've got in the NBL as well, although there is a little break. But where do you stand on red-eye flights, Olgun? Because I thought it was a good idea at the time, and now we're podcasting, and I feel like a little bit of a zombie, and I'm a little bit concerned about what's going to happen over the next 45 minutes to an hour.
Yeah, so red-eyes are, they try to trick you because there's like an implication that you catch a red-eye, maybe get some sleep on it, you land, maybe nap, and then you get the whole day, right? As opposed to just jumping on a flight the next day. But then theoretically, you lose that whole day because it's like a travel day. But I think you lose the day anyway because you're very tired. So you're either groggy or you're sleeping. So just catch a normal flight. It's just way more comfortable. You're going to lose that. You have to ride off that next day anyway. So that's that. And I have just another general rule on flights. Just now that you've brought it up, if it's a 1 hour, if it's a 1 hour flight, you're not allowed to put your seat back. You cannot eat, and you can't go to the bathroom. You're just going to cop the 1 hour, sit in your seat, and we'll get there as quickly as possible. Those are my 3 rules.
Well, that's fine, but that's why you got to sit on the aisle, my man. Then you can get up and do whatever the hell you need to do. But you don't be stuck in the middle seat. Don't be stuck in the window. That's ridiculous. You can't be getting up. So I agree with that. But the good news is when I did land, I was able to watch this South East Melbourne Phoenix Adelaide game. And I kind of was able to do this from a different perspective because I knew the results. I hadn't had a chance to watch it live during the All-Star weekend and everything we were doing over there. So I also read some of the stories and some of the reaction to how this game went down. So it was pretty nice to be able to watch it from that perspective and see little things that I thought I saw during this game. The Phoenix advance. I said to you last week on this podcast that either Sydney or Adelaide was going to get put out of their misery, their fans and their players and their coaches and probably everyone involved. A week later, they're both gone. And let's face it, nobody is surprised that we've got this Final Four and those two teams have been eliminated.
Yeah, can I ask, did you go into watching the game knowing the context of what happened in it? Did you know that? Okay, so what was going through your head when you saw Adelaide jump up to 19-point lead and then a 21-point lead early in the third quarter? Could you even comprehend that there was a situation where Southeast could come back at the time when you were watching there?
Well, yes, because we've seen it that if you put the slightest bit of pressure on this Adelaide team, they will crack and they will crumble. We've seen it repeatedly all season long. And the interesting thing about this, when we saw South East Melbourne and Adelaide play a couple of weeks ago, and it was basically the reverse, with the Phoenix out to a huge lead, Adelaide come back and they win that game. Or did they lose that game? Anyway, they came back from a big deficit.
Southeast won that game, yeah.
Southeast won that. I think it was 105-99, something like that. But there was a big comeback from Adelaide. They actually got the lead back. And in that game, it was Adelaide playing this unstoppable offensive game. Montrezl Harrell was doing whatever he wanted. I didn't feel like this game went down that path. Even when the Phoenix were down by 21 points, I was just sitting there and saying, they are legitimately, the Phoenix that is, having the worst half of basketball I've seen from any team all season in the NBL. Some of the shot making was absolutely absurd. For a team that's based their winning on defense and full court pressure, there was none of that in this game. And then there was just other weird stuff going on, like Nathan Sobey stumbling or tripping over his own feet. And then DJ Vasiljevic, who couldn't hit a shot all day, ends up getting a 3 on the back of that. So it just felt like everything was actually on the Southeast Melbourne side rather than Adelaide. So the question was, can they actually put any type of pressure on this Adelaide team? Because if they do, I still felt like they were going to get back into the game because I didn't think Adelaide was playing that well.
Yeah, so just for everyone out there, we're going to focus on the semi-final series on next week's podcast. Yeah, we're going to sort of focus on this game now and the sort of post-mortem on Adelaide, Sydney, the two teams that are eliminated. But the start of the third quarter, the first possession, it was like I think it was an on-ball with Sobey and Geordie Hunter, and it was immediately a shot at the rim. Now, Geordie Hunter, I think, missed that. He got a putback the next possession. But it seemed really clear that, all right, we have to put heat on the rim here. Adelaide does this thing where they sort of lull you to sleep and almost force you to shoot three-pointers. And that's what Southeast did in the first half. And I honestly thought, as much as people think that the Southeast Melbourne Phoenix had a horrific half, I think they got reasonably good looks. These are very makeable looks. It reminded me of that first game in Kudos Bank Arena between Adelaide and Sydney, where Adelaide jumped out to that like 20-6 lead. But it was because Sydney was missing very, very open looks. So I think it was just shooting luck. And then on the other end, Adelaide was feeling themselves. They started making shots and jumped down to that lead. And then Kendrick Davis hit that, three-quarter court shot that looked like almost like a backbreaker. It seemed like the Phoenix would find it very difficult to come back from that emotionally. But they just put heat on the rim in the second half. They amped up the pressure, picked up full court more than I think they did in the first half. And they basically just put Adelaide on the back foot to the point where Adelaide does this thing where they go into their shell and everything just turned into iso ball offensively. And when that happens, it allowed the Phoenix to run a little bit more. And at that point, by I reckon 2 minutes left in the third quarter, it seemed pretty clear where this game was probably headed. Just because it looked like whatever Adelaide was doing offensively wasn't sustainable, and the Phoenix had their flow back to them. They were able to get into on balls and get heat on the rim and things like that. You just have to attack this Adelaide team because I don't think they had the personnel to defend consistently over 40 minutes.
So the only thing I would say that was different, and the Sydney game that you referenced, and we've discussed this before, and again, I sort of mentioned it, I don't think this was some kind of lockdown Adelaide defensive performance. I mean, the Phoenix were 9 for 35 from the floor at the half, 9 for 35. And yeah, maybe they were getting good looks. But the reason why I'm still putting it all on the Phoenix is because I don't just think this was a situation where, geez, it was a bit of bad shooting. Like they were shooting air balls. They were hitting nothing but backboard. It was not even close. So I don't know what was going on for this group as a whole in the first half, but it was so unlike anything we've seen from them in a little while. And it's kind of interesting because they come off that game against Perth that we discussed that was a completely out of rhythm game, just walking to the free throw line. They weren't really playing their usual style of basketball either. So I don't know whether it was just some weird rusting. I don't know whether it was nerves. I don't know what was going on. But you mentioned Geordie Hunter at the start of the third quarter. But if you go from very early in that third quarter, because Adelaide, even though they led by 21 early in the third, they actually maintained that 14, 16, 17-point edge for most of the third quarter. The game really changed when Hunter was off the floor and they basically had Matt Hurt at the 5 and Malik Lewis at the 4. And we discussed what might be dangerous for the Phoenix against Adelaide. And it was Adelaide's ability to dominate the small lineups of Sydney. And so the question was going to be, do the Phoenix have enough size, one of the smallest teams in the league, do they have enough size to actually contain this Adelaide team? But in the end, it was going small and having Ben Ayre, Angus Glover, Owen Foxwell out on the floor and just creating chaos and defending 94 feet, 94 feet, 90 feet, whatever the FIBA court is. They weren't able to work their way through that. And it really just became, and I know you've discussed it before, and I'm telling you, I'm not criticizing Kendrick Davis here, but it really became, Kendrick Davis, can you please save us? Because no one else can handle what's going on.
Yeah, and we've seen this a bunch of times where, and remember that game against Tasmania? In Tasmania, the Adelaide 36ers lost on the buzzer. It was a very similar story where they jumped out to a big lead and then they couldn't handle sort of a smaller lineup and then they reverted to iso ball and they just fell apart. That's just what happens. And then I think what happens is the 36ers find it tough to score the ball. Isaac Humphries loses a bit of confidence. So Mike Wells loses confidence in him. And so then you have a front court that's Jarrell Martin and Montrezl Harrell. And that's just a really bad defensive front court. And so if you have someone like Matt Hurt who can do his thing inside, or you have guys like Owen Foxwell or Ben Ayre who are able to come off on balls and really penetrate and finish at the rim, then it makes it really difficult for that team to get stops consistently. Then they're walking the ball up the floor. They're not playing at the pace that they want to play at. And it's just very difficult for Adelaide to compete there. And so I think the Phoenix just took over. They took over the physicality. They took over the pace of the game. And ultimately, their small ball lineup with Matt Hurt at the 5, that was something I thought at the start of the season would be an issue. But we've seen over the course of the season that Matt Hurt has generally been okay defensively. If he's coming up in on balls consistently, I'm not really trusting that too much, but he's been okay. And offensively, I don't know if there's a 5-man out there who can match up with him because of his ability to step out, not really hit the 3, but at least be a threat from out there, put the ball on the floor. And then his finishing at the rim is so elite. He's finishing through contact. He's just amazing. And then credit to Malik Lewis, who did a really good job on Montrezl Harrell at the end of that game, just bodying up, hands out, grabbing contested defensive rebounds. Like, these are the things that I think won them the game, and then they were able to push a little bit. And again, the Phoenix just took control of that game. It didn't look like they were going to relinquish that at any point.
Yeah, it didn't. And again, you talk about how you get the Adelaide team to crack, and you mentioned Isaac Humphries. He had just the bizarre turnover, slinging the ball out of bounds from underneath the basket. And then everyone started looking at each other, and you can see that they're talking to each other, and then they're making subs, and players aren't happy being off the floor. And then, Jace Kadee, who was great in this game, and it was tough to see him, obviously emotional at the end of this game, a great career. But he had that inbounds play early in the third quarter where they give away an easy bucket. Angus Glover dunks the ball. Then the one that was even worse was at the end of the third quarter. Sunday Dech throws it into Montrezl Harrell, the back of his ankles for some reason. He's not even looking at him when he makes that pass. Matt Hurt's able to score, and all of a sudden it's within well and truly in single digits. So it unraveled really quickly. And, this is what we've seen all year from this team. And if we just move quickly, big picture, to what it means for Adelaide, to me, based on what we've seen this season, they have to completely tear the whole thing down again. And they have to decide whether they actually want to build an NBL team that can compete and not just bring in random guys every single year and hope for the best. We see it time and time again in the NBL that if you want to have a successful team year on year on year, which this fan base deserves, then go get yourself some locals that can actually build your program around. Now, I thought they did that when they had Isaac Humphries and DJ Vasiljevic committed to this club. Jace Kadee was also there. And then in the end, they bring in the stars, and Kendrick Davis was great. Montrezl Harrell was great, for most of the season. But they ended up clearly, and I'm not saying those two guys, but clearly this was not a locker room that was together all season long. They changed the coach before the season. And I can't see any way that those two guys are there next year. Why would they want to play there? Because there is nothing that tells them that this is a club that they want to be at and they're going to be featured as Australian stars on an NBL team. Melbourne United doesn't treat their guys like that. Sydney doesn't treat their guys like that. Perth Wildcats don't. Tasmania certainly doesn't. And that's why they win games. I remember at the start of the season, and I don't want to name names because I can't remember exactly who it was, so I don't want to get it wrong. But it was the press conference around Scott Ninnis being fired. And there was a reference to, look, we were 8-7 or 8-6. That record's not very good. It's not actually, they were 13-16 in the regular season this year and got bundled out into play-in. And that's not the playoffs. They did not make the playoffs. This was by far the most, you can talk about Sydney, but this Adelaide team, awful season, complete disaster. And now, are you even going to have the same coach back again next year? So they got to figure out if they want to have a winning club, because they do not make moves that suggest that they care about it.
Here's the thing: from what I understand, they are intent on bringing back Michael Wells.
So Kendrick Davis isn't going to be there then. Is that?
They are also confident they're going to keep Kendrick Davis. They're at a point right now where they are talking numbers as far as money goes, right? So they are confident that both of those two will be back. And from what I'm told, they are hopeful that the relationship between those two can mend, right? Now, again, basing a team on hope is not the ideal thing to do, but that seems to be the direction they'll go in. Montrezl Harrell, I don't think will be back. I'd put it at an almost 0% chance that Montrezl Harrell's back. The problem with bringing these guys in is you had for a sliver of a moment, you had some structure in Adelaide, and it looked like it was going to be a no drama situation. Finally, right. After all these years of us covering drama after drama in Adelaide, it looked like they were in a really solid spot. It was Scott Ninnis as its head coach, and Dejan Vasiljevic and Isaac Humphries. You got two marquee players, great. And then you bring in Kendrick Davis, who is an extremely talented player, but that turned DJ into a bystander for most of the season. And you bring in Montrezl Harrell, who, as much as people much as they try to convince us he was a 4-man, Montrezl Harrell was a 5 in world basketball in 2025. And so Isaac Humphries then had to sacrifice a lot of what he did to make sure that Montrezl Harrell was able to come in. And Montrezl Harrell is a passionate, emotional guy. And so someone has to be the adult in the room there and say, all right, I'll sacrifice so he can get his, so this locker room doesn't implode. And that's why I give credit to both of those two marquee locals. I give credit to Jason Kadee, who did as good a job as ever of being the veteran of this team. If Jason Kadee was not on that team, Jason Kadee was Elastigirl, just holding this team together. And it got to a point where obviously he couldn't hold on any longer. But if Jason Kadee wasn't on this team, I I think there would have been an implosion at some point in the middle of the season, and there sort of was anyway. This team just needs to figure out a way to just be solid. They can't bring in sort of erratic pieces, imports who we all know have negative intel or not amazing intel. You're bringing in these guys, yes, they're talented, but what are you giving up to bring in this talent? You are alienating your local players, and you're creating an environment that's not comfortable to be in. Everyone walks into work in Adelaide walking on eggshells. That's just not that's not a healthy place to be as a franchise. They need to get themselves into a healthy place if they want to compete going forward. They need to create some level of stability going forward. If they want to bring back Kendrick Davis, great. Then you can't bring back Montrezl Harrell, and you just need to build around that in a really healthy, balanced, sustainable way. And you also need some depth, because they didn't have depth this season. We spoke about it all season long. Spoke about it going into the season. They didn't have that. So bringing back Kendrick is fine as long as there's balance around him, and as long as you find a way to maximize those key local pieces. Then maybe you can take steps forward. But until then, they're just going to continue being this dramatic team that doesn't make the playoffs. And as much as that gets a ton of eyes, and we can talk about it, the 36ers fans deserve way better than that.
Yeah, they should be angry. They should be angry because, to your point, it looked like they were building something really good about 12 months ago. And it's hard because you look at it, and I hope Kendrick Davis is back next season because, again, even in this game against the Phoenix, he was the one guy that, I mean, he did leave it all out there. Like, you can criticize different things. You can say, well, defense, whatever. He left it all out on the floor. And to be honest, even if you go back to the public blow up that we know about, when he was the guy that was defending a teammate, I can't remember what is actually out there, but he was the guy defending a teammate, we'll say that. And so
Kendrick was, Mike Wells said something toward Isaac Humphries that I think a lot of people in the locker took issue with, and Kendrick stood up for Isaac Humphries.
There we go. I couldn't remember what you put out there. But anyway, so Kendrick Davis, the back end of the season, he played phenomenal basketball. And for the most part, you watch those games, and he was invested. He didn't look like one of those guys that was complaining or having problems. Sure, there's clearly some friction with Mike Wells, and that's why I would have some concerns if they're both back next year. But Adelaide has put themselves in this situation by moving on from Scott Ninnis and bringing in Mike Wells, and again tying themselves into a multi-year deal. So it's their own fault. But I don't know if you're an Australian vet, because that's what they need. They probably need 2 or 3 veteran presences like a Jace Kadee, who you pointed to was awesome. And I don't know this. I don't know Jason Kadee at all, but I sit back and go, well, what a tremendous career he's had. What an unbelievable time he's been as an NBL player and everything else that he's done. He kind of enjoyed his last season. And so he's so highly respected that, do you think that other guys are going to go, if the same pieces are coming back, they're going to sit back and go, yeah, that's the team that I want to go play for? I know maybe money, all those different type of things. Maybe you think you can change it, but at the moment, to me, this is not an attractive club to play for locals, and that's a big problem.
Yeah, so at the start of last season, this was like the perception of Adelaide that, man, like, you really want to go play for Adelaide? It's just like everything is just dramatic all the time. Do you really want to go there? Like, what will that do to your career? And then they sort of mended that toward the end of last season, where it seemed like they were in a healthy spot. They were playing good basketball. Everything just seemed pretty normal out there. And then now this season, that's what the sort of sentiment around the league is again, which is like, all right, if I'm going to go to Adelaide and I'm going to be part of this basket case of a dramatic situation, and I don't know if that's good for me. That is the sentiment of a ton of local players around the league. So again, that's not ideal, because you do want high character local guys to come to Adelaide and play a role in mending that. I don't know if that's going to happen this offseason, but that sentiment that unfortunately was being remedied is unfortunately back.
Yeah, we've had a lot of chats about Adelaide. They were still, I said it all season long, they were still so watchable just to see what was going to happen next. And yeah, I know that people, sometimes they're like, well, you're too negative about Adelaide. I'm telling you, all this frustration over the last 10 minutes of this podcast is for the fans that I believe pack out that building every single time. They deserve a winner. This franchise is too cool with the history and everything that's going on for them to be heading down this direction. So I just get frustrated by that. I want to see Adelaide have a good team on the court. So we'll see what happens next year. Let's move on from them, though. They were up and down all season long. Just quickly on the Phoenix, I did mention the Foxwell Ben Air backcourt, and no disrespect to those guys, but that is not the usual backcourt you see for teams that are in the NBL semifinal series. And both of those guys were unbelievable, and they have been for a period of time here. Nobody likes the FIBA break because we just want to see these semifinal series get going. But I have to imagine there's a part of the South East Melbourne Phoenix that are like, yeah, we'll take a week and a half and see where Derek Walton Jr. is at. Where is he at? He has to be a chance because he's been hinting that he's getting closer and closer and closer.
Yeah, Derek Walton, it feels close. It feels like there's like a chance we see him at some point in this series. And like you said, the FIBA break is helpful. It is a period of time that they can use to mend guys up. I was in Wollongong yesterday, and I saw Darius Days, I saw Trey Kell. They missed the last couple games of the regular season. From what I was told, they could have played in those games if they were games of significance. But this just gave them an opportunity to, get back into playing shape, get their conditioning up, get healthy. And that's what, on Monday, the Hawks did like a big conditioning day where they were sort of run into the ground. So they're at a point where they're largely healthy, I think almost completely healthy, and they're just trying to remain in point. Basically, like, keep going, basically. Don't lose any sort of juice over this FIBA break. So yeah, like this FIBA break is helpful for everybody. I even think about for Bryce Cotton. Like, he played a ton of minutes toward the end of the season. Just this time off is helpful. Melbourne United is probably the prime example of older guys who could probably use just like a couple weeks just to make sure this soft tissue just comes back together. He had Jack White dealing with a back injury. These are all things that just need time to fix. This isn't like, do rehab better. It's just time. It's sleep. It's that sort of stuff. So I think it helps everyone. I think there's a chance we see Derek Walton Jr. And if Derek Walton Jr. is healthy at some point and can provide some sort of impact for the Phoenix, then I think the championship race is wide open. I think any four of these teams could win it if that's the case. If not, I think the other three teams have you can make a case for all three. But Phoenix with Derek Walton Jr., just that extra sort of offensive punch, that extra creation, man, this is open season at this point.
The Phoenix offense was starting to look really dynamic until that game they played out in, what was it? Was that the Terrelgan game or something out there, was it?
The Terrelgan game was the Brisbane game.
That was when he did the hamstring the first time, I believe, unless he had another week after that. But that was back there. And, this Phoenix offense was starting to look really dynamic at that point in time. It's a 3-game series. I've said it a billion times. I've been on the Hawks all season long, but you get Derek Walton back. The Hawks haven't played for over 2 weeks. A little sneak attack in the first game on the road. See if you can flip this thing on its head. So, yeah, I think they're going to be fascinating semifinal series. Because we do have the break, we'll get into them in more detail next week on the ESPN Aussie Hoops Hour and see where we're at in terms of health and all those types of things. Because naturally, there's going to be some things that will change over the next 7 days. So, let's change topics a little bit here and go to the Boomers and go to Kyrie Irving now. I'll throw to you, but it is fascinating because I'm always curious when these things sort of catch on in the mainstream. So everyone that's listening to our podcast, they already know that this Kyrie Irving thing is not new. He's been talking about this for months now. We've discussed it a number of times, whether it's here or on Nothing But Net Aussie Hoops as well. Andrew Bogut came on the show and discussed, what would go down. So it's not new, but it's definitely caught on now that you go to All-Star Weekend and you have a lot of international media, and these are the type of questions that tend to perhaps draw a little more attention. So ultimately, I'm all for, and you can disagree with me, but I'm all for the idea of getting excited about the prospect of this. But the reality of this is that it is a very slim chance. We've seen precedent before that getting this paperwork through after already playing for a senior national team in the past, not the easiest task.
Everyone should want Kyrie Irving to play for Australia. Just off the top. That is if you don't want Kyrie, one of the most talented basketball players ever, to play for Australia, then you're being a contrarian just for the sake of it, right? So that's the first thing. Everyone should want this to happen. Australia has an interest in this happening, obviously, because of course they should. Kyrie Irving has signaled that, of course, he would like to play for Australia. Now, unfortunately, it doesn't matter that Kyrie Irving wants to play for Australia, and it doesn't matter if Basketball Australia wants him to play. Those are two important pieces in it. but the decision ultimately comes down to FIBA. And when I speak to people around Basketball Australia, they basically look at FIBA, the FIBA Secretary General, the decision that would have to be made, the considerations that are put into a player like Kyrie Irving potentially leaving Team USA to go to Australia. All of those considerations create this wall that is in effect impenetrable. It is almost impossible for this wall to be surmounted. This is in effect an impossibility based on what FIBA would have to put into consideration when they're judging whether someone like Kyrie Irving could lead Team USA for the Boomers. They would take into account how long he has been in Australia, how long he has played for the domestic competition in Australia, which is obviously zero. He has not been in Australia very long at all. His connection with Australia, which I don't think is significant. They would take into account the growth of basketball in Australia, and if there's a need for more development. I think Australia, we can't out of one side of our mouths talk about how great the development is here and how much of a basketball country it is here, and also say we need Kyrie Irving to help lift it. So all of these things, I don't think Kyrie Irving ticks any of the boxes of the considerations that FIBA would take into account when judging whether he should be able to switch. So unfortunately, when Basketball Australia looks at that, they see this as basically an immovable object. This is something that is practically not going to happen. So there's not that much stock actually being put into it. As much as Kyrie Irving wants it, as much as BA wants it, as much as the fans want it. It's not up to them. It is up to FIBA. And the overwhelming consensus among those in the know is that it is extremely, extremely, extremely unlikely that it would ever happen.
Kyrie did have a photo with an Akubra on there once, going back a few years ago. So maybe he was planting the seed earlier. It has been a couple of months now of just really interesting quotes. He had that quote with Josh Green when they played the Hornets, and he was like, "Hey, he's my Aussie brother." Lots of comments that we just haven't seen before in the past, which has at least been interesting over the last few months. And to your point about people rallying against it, I would say it is very Australian to be like, "Hey, you didn't want us. You didn't want us a few years ago. Now you want to come? What? Because you can't make the Team USA team?" So I understand that some people have that sentiment, but I agree. We've spoke so many times about what's the biggest problem with the Boomers program or the Australian guys that are coming through now. So many great defensive players, so many great role players in the NBA that are going to have long careers. And obviously then you have guys like Dyson that's gone to a next level, and Josh Giddey as well. We'll wait and see about the other guys coming through. But the one thing they don't have is a dynamic offensive creator. You got Josh Giddey, creator/scorer from all over the floor, just a world-class guy. Like, that is the one thing that is holding back the Boomers from being able to compete with these great teams. We saw it at last year's Paris Olympics. So yeah, the idea of having Kyrie Irving would be unbelievable. But here's the other thing. He did also, during that press conference, kind of hint, well, we're just going to wait and see what happens with Team USA. Now, you could suggest that that is him saying, Team USA saying, sure, go for it, clear, we don't care. You could also take into account that maybe that's him saying, well, the Olympics are in LA in 2028. Steph Curry might not be there. I don't know what other guards are going to be there. Hey, maybe Team USA wants me to play for them in 2028. And if they do, I kind of get the feeling he might play for them.
Potentially. How old will Kyrie Irving be in 2028? We're talking like 36?
Like 36 at that point in time, yeah.
So he's 32 right now. He turns 33 this year.
Yeah.
100%. So he'd be 36 by the time that comes around. As in whether he's good enough to make an Olympic team, we have to see what happens with USA Basketball. But I imagine when he says we're waiting for Team USA to say their piece, I imagine that they have to clear him. So they have to clear him. Basketball Australia has to have a desire for him.
I would say
when it begins, there is a fee that is involved as well. And then the FIBA Secretary General has to make the decision. There's just like a lot of things that have to happen here.
There has been some stuff that's gone down that also may suggest that he would not want to play for Team USA. We should also say that.
There's like a political part of this that makes him not in love with Team USA, which I understand. He then was born in Australia, so he wants to play for Australia.
No doubt.
But again, it doesn't matter what he thinks. It matters what the FIBA Secretary General thinks, and it's unlikely that that person okays this. I
don't have a PlayStation or any type of gaming console right now, but if I did,
how?
I don't know. It's just, what have I got time? When have I got time to play games, man? You know. But if I did, I would, get the Boomers on 2K. And I would chuck Kyrie on there and, have him drop 30 points in the green and gold. That'll be fun. So it's fun to think about. This is going to be a long process, a long drawn-out process, and I'm sure it's not the last we'll hear about it. In fact, if he's serious about it, we'll probably be hearing similar quotes and similar conversations, the stories going all over the place for the next 3 years. So we'll see if FIBA squashes it.
But here's what I don't want, though. I don't want, and this is why the conversation irks me a little bit, because I don't want people's hopes, because I think people will read a headline or they'll see a graphic of, man, imagine if the Boomers look like this, but it's not realistic. Unfortunately, it's the overwhelming likelihood is that it's not going to look like that. So I think it's unintentionally misinforming the public of what this program is going to be, because it is more likely that we'll see Ben Henschel as that creating, scoring guard as opposed to Kyrie Irving. And I don't know if people want to hear that.
So we'll see on Kyrie either way. It's fun to think about. Highly unlikely. I think that's the main point of this. But as I said, I don't think it's the last we're going to hear about. But you spoke about Ben Henschel and guys that could potentially be in there. Now, there was an Australian at All-Star Weekend. It was at the Basketball Without Borders camp, and it was Dash Daniels. And it's interesting because for those that have been tracking the junior career of Dash Daniels, highly credentialed, highly touted, lots of excitement about what he can bring to the table. Perhaps more excitement than, well, certainly more excitement than what there was for Dyson Daniels at the same age. And it is funny to me, Olgun, that a lot of it is, well, he's a more dynamic offensive player at that age. Now, Dyson clearly was a lot more offensive-minded before he got to the NBA as well. But then you get to this Basketball Without Borders camp with some of the best international prospects from all across the world at the All-Star Weekend. They play a bunch of games. And when it's all said and done, the defensive MVP, Dash Daniels. It just runs in the families, man. These guys can just guard up.
And it's funny because you look at Dash Daniels, he looks really similar to Dyson.
Yeah.
You look at the way he plays, the way he moves in a similar way to Dyson too. So all of the similarities, man, it's crazy. Same surname and everything. And it's just funny just how that tracks. I think growing up, I've watched Dyson play since under 16s. I think I've watched him at different Australian Junior National Championships. And the defense is the thing that clearly sticks out, right? He's like a 6'5" guard. He's got great athletic tools. I think at that point, because I covered Dyson as a junior too, Dyson's offensive package was, I think, a bit more advanced at that age than Dash's was. Dyson was playing for the NBA Academy, dropping triple doubles at junior national tournaments. He looked like a floor general out there, whereas Dash Daniels, I think, is still developing that part of his game. But defensive MVP is a really healthy thing to have at this point in his career. The size is there, the athletic frame is there. So he is tracking really well. And when you speak to any of our draft experts at ESPN, you speak to Jonathan Gavoni or Jeremy Wu, they'll consistently tell you that this is a potential lottery pick for 2026. And so you couple that with the fact that he's about to join a United team that will have Shea Illy on it, and he'll be coached by Dean Vickerman, who is really highly regarded around world basketball. He's in a really healthy spot when it comes to his development and where he's going to be over the next 12 months going into what his draft year is going to be. So I'm really excited to see how he tracks, how the offensive game develops, and how the defensive game continues to develop. Because if he becomes half the defender that Shea Illy is, man, look out.
So the age is interesting because I didn't get to the Basketball Without Borders camp. We were running all over the place, getting other things done. We did get a chance to chat with him, though, so you will hear from Dash Daniels on Nothing But Net Aussie Hoops Thursday night. You'll see that on ESPN, so make sure you catch the conversation with Dash Daniels because, this, Ogs, just love. I know this is irrelevant to the basketball stuff, but Dyson and Dash and the whole family, just like the most lovely people of all time. So it's no surprise that they're great with us and great with anyone that wanted to catch up with him. But I did see Dash walking around, and you mentioned his size, and I am curious if he's got another couple inches to grow in him. He's obviously still so young because you talk about the projections, and it's so weird to say, but like 6'5" is almost size, when it comes to the NBA these days. You have got guys like Dyson and Josh Giddey, the guards that are like 6'7", 6'8", that around that height. I wonder if he is still growing. That would change things a little bit. That would be the only thing I would say. But I agree with you on the Melbourne United stuff, and we're all in a really fortunate position to be able to see him play on our home shore like we did with Giddy a few years ago.
Yeah, I agree. I imagine he'll get to 6'7", 6'8". I don't, just from anecdote, I think younger brothers generally just end up the tallest somehow.
What?
I know.
Is that right?
I think that's the thing. Like I'm the tallest in my family.
Yeah.
Like I know Dice's older brother Kai
It's
is
the rule.
6'5".
It's the well-known rule of height per the Ulrich family.
Yeah, this is very well known. But look, even if he stays at 6'5", that is so reasonable.
Yeah,
that is a reasonable place to be as a point guard, creator type who can guard. But if he gets to 6'7", 6'8", again, being that height and a point guard multiple positions, like the difference between guarding 1 through 3 versus 1 through 4 changes everything. So I'm excited to see it. And I'm intrigued to see, where he's going to be in his development come October, the start of the NBL season, NBL 26. If he's going to be in a position where Dean Vickerman will trust him with the ball in his hands as a ball carrier, maybe pushing the pace, guiding the United offense. He's still super, super young. There's a reason why NBL teams don't recruit point guard next stars. It's a very difficult thing to do because putting the ball in their hands is very difficult because you're trying to win games. That is the priority. Development is secondary. You're trying to win games. And so if there's trust from Dean Vickerman that he can do that, then I think that says a lot of how he's regarded by like serious basketball people, that he is someone who can impact winning at such a young age as a point guard. That would be really cool.
Yeah, there's been enough evidence now that NBA teams trust the NBL enough that he could still be a lottery pick to, that 10 to 20 range. So, yeah, lottery or outside the lottery. But then when you see guys that actually play a lot in the NBL, like LaMelo, and I know there was a lot of hype around there, but Giddey, who skyrocketed, then you can get yourself into the top 10 if you play. And that's why Melbourne's an interesting destination, because we did see Ariel Hukporti come in, and he was so valuable and so reliable, particularly defensively, which is why it matters to Dash, and it's probably why Dean Vickerman really wanted him out on the floor. So, yeah, if he actually becomes a rotation player in that team that we can just guess now is going to be highly competitive and a really good defensive team, yeah, I don't see why that stock wouldn't continue to rise. And let's face it, the way that Dyson has developed in the league, that's going to help Dash as well, because they're going to see that and they're going to go, okay, this is what he can potentially be. This is what the ceiling is there. So, hey, man, the Daniels family, they're the toast of Aussie hoops right now on the men's side for sure. Like, it's just a great year for those guys so far. I was almost going to wrap us up, and then I forgot we had 2 coaching changes. So, yeah, Adam Ford, you already hinted to. The Brisbane one is interesting. Now, I know we went through this last weekend. There's different reasons why, you could get the executive of the year. And all I'm saying is if you finish 8th on the table, that probably suggests that, I don't know if you're in the running for executive of the year, and then within a week you fire your coach. Now, I'm not saying that was the decision made by the winner there, but it's just interesting. I mean, Justin Schuller not in Brisbane for too long. Another team that we're all kind of just waiting to see if they can figure it out. Similar to Adelaide, but probably on a more quieter scale, I would say.
Yeah, so we knew this one was coming. The sort of chatter around was that it was very likely that Schuller was on the chopping block and that the Bullets would pull the trigger sooner than later. It's very interesting because when I asked around for like the reason, like what is it, like why, there are some things on the fringes as far as what some players thought of him, how he was regarded around the team, some of the injuries that they sustained and the schedule, his leadership style, all those things I think were on the edges. But there was no like concrete reason. And what it was put to me, it was just, look, he's been here for 2 seasons and we need to take a step forward. And we feel as though we need someone in that position who can perhaps garner more respect, is a bit more commanding, perhaps a little bit more demonstrated to lift this group to the next level. Otherwise, they would have sort of floated in that 6, 7, 8 range for the rest of time. I think that's what the thinking was. And so when I hear that, I think as much as some assistant coaches around the league have their eye on this position because Brisbane's a beautiful city and they have an interesting core already locked in. Mitch Norton's locked in. Sam McDaniel re-signed. Tyrell Harrison, Casey Prather. There is like a core there. I don't think this is an assistant coach, NBL. This feels like it's going to someone who's a little bit more high level than that, a little bit more proven as a leader, someone who has more of a commanding voice, who can really sort of guide a group of men to success. That's what it feels like. I don't think they'll pull the trigger again on an up-and-comer or someone new or try to be clever with it. I think it's more bringing someone in who is a little bit more proven.
It's interesting because just as you're discussing that, I'm thinking about what this means for Aussie coaches. And we always have the question marks, and we've gone through it with the Boomers. Is it going to be an Australian coach? Now, clearly, if it was going to be an Australian guy, or if it is, there are guys like Capehorn that have had an incredible resume and got it done overseas. And then, there was the guys like Vickerman and Trevor Gleeson that were obviously in there as well that are legendary Australian coaches at this point in time for what they've been able to do. But if you do just think across the league, whether it was Justin Schuller, Scott Ninnis was in there as well. It hasn't been a great time for the Aussie coaches. I'm missing one that I was just thinking of as well, but it does feel like these teams, Jacob Jackomas, of course, in Illawarra, and then you bring in Justin Tatum. Adelaide went to Mike Wells. That clearly didn't work out, as we discussed this season. And I'm curious if Brisbane goes the international route there. But it's been a rough couple of years. We always talk about the coaching talent we have coming out of Australia, and you would love to see these guys get extended opportunities. But the patience isn't there with these teams, and they're moving on from these local guys if they believe they can get something overseas. The Phoenix a little different with Mike Kelly, obviously been here for a while, but they brought in Josh King. But yeah, it's just an interesting trend that we're seeing, and I wonder, outside of a guy like Dean Vickerman, are we going to get to the point where we don't have any Australians coaching in the league? It kind of feels like it's trending that way. With Justin Schuller, we discussed it at the start of the season. I would just say that, remember when he roasted the team publicly in the first or second press conference of the season? And I just thought it was interesting at the time. We discussed it, and I said, I wonder how that sits with the locker room. He's only a newish coach. I don't know whether he has the credits in the bank to do that publicly with a team full of veterans. It was an interesting start to the season. It obviously didn't work out for this team. They were decimated by injuries. But yeah, I got a little concern for the Australian coaching ranks in the NBL.
So do I. And I think we may have discussed this before, but the idea of Japan sort of stealing Australian players, Australian Kiwi players, and even Europe, like Japan is taking a lot of high-level Australian coaches. So is the G League, so is the NBA, so is college. You look at, Paulie Henare, Aaron Fern over in college, Trevor Gleeson. A lot of these guys are just Sean Dennis, high-level coaches who are just choosing to coach overseas because the money is so substantial. And the NBL is slowly turning into almost like a breeding ground for young American coaches to sort of get their first go at it. Now, I think there's like a chance that the Bullets go in American direction. They do have a lot of Americans in their decision-making ranks.
Yeah.
As for the Cairns Taipans, we knew this at the start of the season that it's probably going to be 40s last year, and that Kerry Williams was more than likely penciled in as his replacement. Now, with 40 being part of the selection process, it feels like that's almost a given that Kerry Williams will have sort of it will be sort of at the top of the list. As for where 40 goes, a lot of people are saying Japan. I'm under the impression it's not Japan. Think further north in America. So that's probably where 40's headed. But yeah, Brisbane, Schuller out, and you look around the assistant coaches in the league, and I don't know, outside of Jacob Chance, and I think someone like Joel Carlu in Illawarra, like I don't know who NBL teams are really jumping at as far as, yeah, man, like we're ready to give you a chance. It feels like a lot of teams are in a part of their pathway and of their journey where it's like, okay, like we need someone who's going to maximize this group, not someone who we're going to start the first year of a 3-year journey with.
Yeah, but to that point, it is, and you talk about a guy like Jacob Chance, who everyone's just assumed that he will get a job eventually, and being around the Booms program, all those types of things. Hey, if you do take this job in the NBL and it doesn't work out quickly and you're fired, they can say part ways, whatever, fired within a year or a year and a half, it's not good for your career. And when you see this happen a few times, it's like, okay, are you better off hanging out being an assistant and going overseas and being an assistant overseas and building your resume that way. So that's why, I am curious, how it pans out for some of the young coaches that are still coming through, because we have seen, Capon do that. Obviously, he was, at the AAS and did great things there, but then, I've been over in the US for a few times now and highly respected. He's around the best coaches in the NBA. Everyone knows who he is, and then that sort of builds your resume without having that professional head coaching experience there.
I'll say this, the scrutiny around the NBL is really high these days, especially internally, as in like within the Australian basketball ecosystem, where if you do fail, I use fail in air quotes, then it's very difficult for you to sort of recoup your image. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you go to let's say you go to the G League and you have like a losing season, there's not that much media coverage of the G League. You can just jump to another team and continue in that pathway, find success and continue to climb. Look at someone like Damian Cotter. Damian Cotter was head coach of the Sydney Kings, was fired by the Kings, took some time off, ultimately went the G League route. Now he's an assistant coach of the Chicago Bulls. So you just have to find a different route to climb that ladder. And then once you rebuild your image and just get better as a coach, get a ton of reps under you, then you can sort of re-enter. But I can imagine a lot of young Australian coaches thinking, is being a first year, should I use my first head coaching sort of coin on the NBL, or should I do it overseas, get a ton of reps, climb that ladder, and then come back here when I'm a bit more prepared? I wonder if a lot of young coaches around the league are thinking that way.
Yeah, but I mean, particularly, and I don't know, it's different for everyone, but financially, if you can do that over in the US, you're going to be in a better position, most likely, most of the time, depending on where you land. Regardless. So, that's fascinating. I mean, the big thing is for these guys, and they are built different in the idea of what they want to do. I had many conversations with Trev when he was coaching in the NBA, assistant coaching in the NBA, and he loved it. He wanted to stick there forever, but it was also like there was a constant itch that, man, I miss being on the sidelines. I miss being a head coach. Like these guys want to be a head coach, I guess, if you have that drive. So, it's an interesting scenario, but perhaps that'll be a topic we'll discuss with Gazy and Copes on Nothing But Net Aussie Hoops, because I do think it is fascinating the way it's gone down. And I, we haven't heard a lot from Jacob Jackomas. I did see he's an assistant coach with that really talented under-19 World Cup squad. But I hope, Justin Schuller, whatever it is, I hope he gets another opportunity really, really soon, because I don't know what happened behind the scenes. But also, let's be honest, you need the talent and you need the injury luck. I never looked at this Brisbane team from the start of the season as a team that was a threat to do anything. So, you can only do what you can do. So I feel a bit that.
Yeah. The other thing is, like, you can put stock in a head coach going into a season. Yeah. You wonder, like, how many, like, win shares does each coach get? I think Justin Schuller is a fine enough coach, but I don't know how many win shares I'm giving him. I don't know how many wins he is getting this Bullets team. Whereas if you place him with like a Josh King, for example, you maybe give him one or two just based on someone who's of that caliber. As for Jackomas, from what I understand, I think he was being paid out by the Illawarra Hawks, and so he was unable to get another NBL coaching gig for a certain amount of time. My understanding is that has now ended, and so I think he will be sort of on the market to, I think in his mind, hopefully join a coaching staff in the NBL next season, potentially as an assistant, and work his way back into what he hopes to be, which is a head coach again one day. But I can see Jackomas in the NBL in some capacity next season.
Yeah, it would be good because I feel for the way that Tatum's been able to turn around the Illawarra Hawks has been one of the great stories and been really enjoyable to watch. And I think they're going to win the title. Odds in a few weeks' time. But we've got to show some love to our Aussie coaches, and I hope things work out for those guys. Sometimes when we podcast, we're like, geez, we've got a week until this semi-final series. It's okay if it's a quick one. 30 minutes is totally fine. And then we get to this point where we are beyond 50 minutes. Before we go, we've had several people that love the fact that you just like to drop some late news nuggets in the podcast in the last 3 minutes. If you don't have anything, that's fine. Shout out to everyone that's still listening to the podcast. We love you for that. Please let us know on the social channels what you thought of today's show. We appreciate it. Rate and review the show, all those things, whether it's YouTube or on the podcast platform. Anything, Olgun, before we wrap this up?
Okay, let's go to
Money.
Because I also have to be cognizant of what I can't say yet. One is, so there's this Bullets coaching job. Now, I'll say the Bullets are very, very early in the process, to the point where they've sort of thought about some names, but not really, right? They have not taken a step forward as far as finding a new head coach. But someone who I know has signaled that he would be interested in this job is Chase Buford. He is signaled to...
That right there is a nugget, my friend. For everyone that's still listening to the podcast, let me tell you, that's one of your finest nuggets that you've brought, the two-time NBL championship coach. We haven't heard much from him for a couple of years. I would love to see him back in the league. I'm fired up, man. That's good stuff. And I swear to God, if anyone has just skipped to the end of this podcast to listen to this, I will never forgive you. You have to listen to the entire thing to earn. Check the stats. Check the analytics. I know. But I know that he has signaled to those around him that he'd like to get back in the NBL, and the Brisbane job is one that is appealing. Awesome. Whether Brisbane is interested is a different story. They're too early in their process to show interest in anyone just yet. But you imagine that he's two of the Chase Buford. If you're an NBL team with a vacancy, to not show interest in Chase Buford is to not do your due diligence, unfortunately. I'm glad you said that. I was going to say, hey, Brisbane Bullets, you haven't made the playoffs in about 3 decades. I would say a 2-time championship coach from 2 years in the league. You probably want to show some interest in this man. That's just my tip from the outside. Yes. And the other one I'll say is that we're entering sort of 10-day contract areas. Yes. And so there are players out there who a lot of NBA teams are like reaching out about. And the hottest names, as far as guys who might get 10 days or even 2 ways at the end of the season that could then be converted or maybe stay on with those franchises. Aaron Armstrong, obviously. I think a lot of us are waiting for next season, but there is like a real chance that there could be something in the offing toward the end of this NBA season. Will Magnay is another one that there's like a lot of smoke around. A lot of NBA teams are reaching out about him. And then Matt Hurt is another one that I heard as a potential 10-day candidate. So these guys, I would just keep a close eye on it as this season comes to an end, and beyond that, it's not just for next season and hopefully getting on a summer league roster or whatever. I think a lot of teams are looking at those 3 guys in particular as potential 10-day candidates. That's good stuff. That's good stuff. It's exciting stuff. It is already interesting. We've seen a couple of players sign overseas from the league. Montrezl Harrell, I believe. Montrezl went to China. And we give you a lot of credit, as we always like to, because you do such a great job covering Aussie hoops. And, late in the podcast, you also went to the Tanzanian Basketball League with Will Magnay. So well done for that. He's done a great job in Tanzania. It is good that Scott Roth's tour around Tanzania is working as far as the world, how much the world is paying attention to everyone down in Tanzania. So everyone on that little island of Tanzania, congratulations to you on your championship. For those that didn't see that clip, I don't know how they get Tasmania and Tanzania. They say it like it's Tasmania, but then it's not. They get it wrong. And has anyone ever heard of someone dominating the Tanzania Basketball League? Is there a Tanzania Basketball League? I don't know. It's shout out to Will Magnay of Tanzania. What a man. What a man. I thought Tasmania was famous enough, unfortunately. This was on Fox Sports in the US. People brought up Will Magnay's name as, the Lakers need a center. And it got spread around that Will Magnay is someone who, again, they don't know that he was injured for the end of the season with a broken toe. He's only just started running again. So everyone relax. He's not leaving Tanzania for the Lakers anytime soon. But he's saying that teams are circling. I get some strange questions about Australia over this part of the world. You know that. It's perhaps not totally up to scratch with things we get done over there in Australia. But anyway, Will Magnay, that would be cool to see him back in the league. Obviously, spent some time in New Orleans a few years back. All right, let's wrap that up. That was a cool podcast. Plenty to get to there. Make sure you do let us know whether it's the Adelaide stuff. Please, if you're a 36ers fan, if you're still positive, totally fine. If you want to vent, do it on the socials. We'd love to hear from you what you think the Adelaide 36ers could do. Of course, the Kyrie Irving conversation as well. So plenty there. Next week, it should be back to regular scheduled programming Tuesday morning in Australia. We should try and record Olgun and break down these 2 semi-final series, Melbourne and Perth, and of course, Illawarra and South East Melbourne. Great to see you. And, I think all things considered, I made it through here without too many major errors or brain lapses on very little sleep. So that's a positive.
Hey man, you've been on your little holiday in San Francisco. I've just been grinding, getting down to the gong and watching practice and things like that. So I hope you've enjoyed your time off.
I did enjoy it. Time off is not how I would describe it, but I had a lot of fun, and I'm very, very. It's definitely not work, Olgun. I'll say that. It's definitely not work. All right, let's wrap it up. This was the ESPN Aussie Hoops Hour podcast for Kane and Olgun. We'll leave it there. Make sure you check out Nothing But Net Aussie Hoops Thursday night on ESPN, and we'll speak to you guys next time.